This is Scott Richmond
and Arnie Sherman.
You're listening to What Do You Know on Newstalk KGVO, AM 1290 and 1015 FM. Good morning, Arnie. How are you?
Well, Scott, how are you doing?
I'm good. It's been a long weekend, huh?
Yes. You know, last week we had a very interesting show on Africa.
Yes.
With Steve Hayes on the Corporate Council on Africa. Now we kind of go from 54 countries and 1.2 billion people down to little old Missoula, Montana. And, a pivotal vote that's going to be upcoming in a few weeks here on the demolition of the Missoula Mercantile Building.
Wow. Controversy.
And while this is a very insider issue for Missoula, Montana, a squabble over whether to embrace growth or to resist it, it's instructive for other communities. Every place I've lived, there's been an issue around historic preservation of some sort or another, and whether or not you forget your past and your roots and do what's economically the most viable alternative, or you take into consideration the good old days and nostalgia and all of that, and make that a significant part of what you're going to do in the future. It's an issue that affects any kind of
such
community.
An emotional issue
and
too.
It's a very emotional issue here, and it really is sort of stratified. The Chamber of Commerce did a survey among its business members, and 85% said tear the thing down.
Right.
But you go to a council meeting, or you read the letters to the editor, or you just talk to people on the street, even people that I work with on a day-to-day basis, and they have fond memories of the Mercantile, which was built, as you know, in 1877.
Wow.
And, operated from 1877 to 1978. So, 100 years as the Missoula Mercantile. And then it closed down for a few years.
Right.
And then it became, the Bon Marché department store.
Right.
For a few years. And then that closed in 2005 and became Macy's, but only for 5 years. And then 2010, Macy's left.
It closed.
And it's been empty for 6 years. And there's been issues of asbestos and all sorts of other things. But lots of developers have come and looked at it, and in 6 years, nobody's been able to come up with a viable economic plan, until HomeBase, a group out of Bozeman,
right,
that has done development projects in Bozeman, has come in and want to put a 5-story Marriott hotel and commercial retail mixed use facility, and as any private developer, they're wanting to use their money most efficiently and effectively, and their recommendation after looking at all the options is to tear it down. And there's been a tremendous pushback against that.
Is it a vocal minority or is it a majority?
I think it's a vocal minority, but it's still vocal and important people. And it's it's a position that has to be given serious consideration. I mean, and there's some logical questions, which, today we have HomeBase's Andy Holloran on the show. We're going to ask him. I mean, isn't there a way to build something new with preserving some of the old?
Right.
Can there be a facade, that gives people that feeling of memory of the good old days and the Merc? I mean, there is leaded glass and there's copper and there was ceiling. There was pressed ceiling. There were some very interesting architectural features.
Right.
That while maybe don't mesh with an ultra modern plan for a new 5-story Marriott, there still needs to be, I think, some recognition that the community has strong feelings about it, and that needs to be, I think, considered.
I remember back in New York when they were planning on moving Penn Station. I don't know if they still are, but planning on moving it to the old post office across the street.
Right.
That they were going to preserve the facade and much of the post office while they built on top of that, but built within it. So they preserved that facade, but at the same time, they created a completely new space.
So we're going to try to find out
today emotional.
whether this was all taken into consideration, whether it's just a callous business decision. I don't know if Andy knows what he's in for, but I think we have to ask those questions because in a few weeks, the Historic Preservation Society, and then by June 7th, the Missoula City Council is going to vote on whether to demolish the Missoula Mercantile and put up a 5-story Marriott hotel and other mixed-use real estate.
Well, I'm looking forward to it. You're listening to What Do You Know on Newstalk KGVO with Scott and Arnie. Back after this, we'll have Andy Holloran on for a full hour. All right, we're back with What Do You Know with Scott and Arnie. Our guest is Andy Holloran. Andy, how are you? Identify yourself.
Andy Holloran from Montana.
Okay.
So, Andy, did HomeBase expect the strong reaction it got out of the community when it came into announce that it was going to put a 5-story Marriott hotel where the Missoula Mercantile is?
We did expect some feedback. Obviously, the community of Missoula has a very passionate segment, very strong preservation group, which we have a great deal of respect for. I would say that the opposition, if you want to call it that, has been very well organized and very vocal, and they should be heard. And we think it's a healthy dialogue, and that's what makes Missoula great.
Is there something about a building from 1877, that building in particular, that ought to be preserved? Is there something that you are contemplating preserving to give it some recognition of what stood on that site for 140 years or so?
You bet. When we first looked at the Mercantile project back in August of last year, our plan was to do a complete renovation of the existing building. That, for us, proved to be very costly, but most importantly, we thought that the configuration of the building itself would make it very difficult to find a user or a tenant that would allow us to finance the renovation. We then looked at various options to renovate portions of it, the facade. At the end of the day, it's a very old building, and for us, it makes a lot more sense to start fresh with a nod to the Mercantile and really celebrate the sense of commerce, the sense of trade, the sense of people on that really, really dynamic, important corner that's been vacant for 6-7 years.
Sure. What would you keep? What is that? Nod to the past that would be kept?
I think two things. One, we have categorized our process as a deconstruction permit. It would be easy, less expensive, quicker to just demolish the entire building. There is some very precious timbers, some dimensional wood, some columns, some tin ceilings within the building that are valuable and should be saved. As we look at the design of the exterior, we have gotten tremendous feedback from a lot of people, including the Historic Preservation Commission, City Council, and city leaders. And so we have adjusted and modified our design to perhaps be a little more conservative, a little more traditional, and start to pick up other architectural elements that the existing Mercantile has.
Sure. Just for our listeners' benefit, tell us a little about your background.
Sure. So I have been with the company, Discovery Land Company, for the better part of 17 years, and we develop large-scale communities throughout North America. As such, with my role, we've moved around quite a bit. We were fortunate enough to move to Bozeman almost 5 years ago and fell in love with Montana. We have 3 boys, and we as a family just felt Montana was home. So we have segued and transitioned out of that role into creating HomeBase, which is our little development company.
And you've done a couple of developments so far in Bozeman. What are some of those projects?
Sure. Most recently, we've been last couple of years focused primarily on downtown urban infill projects. We feel that repurposing infrastructure, going into a walkable pedestrian location makes a lot of sense. And we did a townhouse project called Block M, 18 townhomes right in the heart of downtown Bozeman. We recently completed in September a 104-room Element by Westin hotel that has been extremely well received. And we're under construction on a mixed-use project called 5 West, which is a combination of ground floor retail, restaurants, office, and 48 residential units.
Right in the heart of downtown Bozeman?
Right in the heart of downtown Bozeman.
Yeah, I was just there this past weekend. That's where I saw Andy, or weekend before, and it was stunning. I mean,
sure. So how come it's a Marriott property for here as opposed to a Westin property?
So a couple of things. One, Weston is owned by Starwood.
Right.
And Starwood in and of itself is a fabulous brand and a great company, as is Marriott. We had considered both an Element by Weston and a Residence Inn. The reason we went with Marriott is a couple reasons. Marriott is in the process of acquiring Starwood, so soon there'll be one large company.
Right.
And most importantly, Marriott embraced our desire to do a custom hotel. They support and recognize that communities like Missoula want their own signature, and that was very important for us to get that approval.
So the most important question is: will my Starwood points transfer to Marriott when they merge together? Because that's important. Will they be consolidated?
Arnie, that is above my pay grade.
So, what are the next steps here? I mean, you talked about a well-oiled opposition, that wants to maintain the historic, significance of that building as they see it. In college, I once took a course in aesthetics, and I realized very early on that everybody, beauty is in the eye of the beholder, right? And everybody has a different take on what is right and what fits and what makes sense. But what are the next steps? There's the opposition. You have a historic preservation vote. You have a city council vote that's tentatively scheduled for June. How do you see the process playing itself out?
You bet. We have had a series of hearings with the Historic Preservation Commission. It's been an active dialogue back and forth. We expect to have a few more meetings with the HPC. At some point before June 7th, I imagine they will vote on our application. If it's a yes vote, which we certainly hope so, we'll proceed with the project and go towards demolition, deconstruction, building plans, and such. If it's a no vote, then the option is to appeal to the city council, and that would occur sometime in June or July, I imagine.
And your expectation would be to break ground when? To move forward? I mean, if things work out, when would you expect to start, actual work on the demolition, deconstruction, and moving forward?
In a perfect world, we would have started that process by now. But given the process and that we're in, we would hope to begin that deconstruction process this summer. There's first an environmental abatement process that needs to take place, which will take 60 days. Then we would move into a deconstruction, which will take about 90 days, which would put us in a position to really start construction towards the end of the year.
Right.
And what type of impact will the project have on the community from an economic standpoint, from a job creation standpoint? What do those figures look like?
I think they can be significant. When you look at the tax revenue right now, the Mercantile Building is generating approximately $22,000 a year in tax revenue. With our proposed project, those estimates go up to $800,000 a year. So that is significant in and of itself.
Sure.
Between the hotel operation and the ground floor retail restaurant space, we would expect to have anywhere from 200 to 300 new job creation directly attributed to that project, not to mention the indirect impact that a project like this will have. We look at, on a little bit smaller scale, our project in Bozeman, the Element by Weston Hotel. When you have 104 rooms, average occupancy of 80%, that's putting 150 to 200 people a night in downtown, all eating, drinking, shopping, and the impact on those retailers and those businesses is really strong. Exciting.
Right.
So having lived here for 20 years in Missoula, there have been lots of projects that look like they were going to be starters that turned into being non-starters. Even for this site, there were other developers who came in and had plans. So let me ask just a very fundamental question. You have the funding to do this, am I correct? I mean, this thing is fully funded to go if you get a yes vote?
We have a proven track record to get complicated projects of this magnitude complete.
Okay.
We have a final franchise agreement with the Marriott Corporation. We have great lending relationships throughout the state of Montana, and we are confident that we have the capability of financing this and moving forward once we have an approval on the deconstruction permit.
Sure.
It's not a straight answer, is it?
Well, it's better than saying we're going to go out and find the money if once we get approval.
We're highly confident.
Good. So why? Let me just ask, why were you not prepared for the reaction you got from the community? It seemed like you weren't prepared for the visceral nature of what happened here. Was it because the Bozeman experience was smooth compared to this, and you hadn't put your feet completely in the water here? I mean, it just seemed like you came in with drawings and a design and ready to go, and then wham, there was this pushback on it. Give me some sense of what was going on at that point.
You bet. So this project for us has been evolving, as I mentioned, since last August. It was this spring when we came to the realization that for us to move forward, we needed to look at a full deconstruction. So prior to submitting our demolition permit application, we thought it was prudent to consult with the local historic preservation officer, which we did, and then go in front of the Historic Preservation Commission. So really, they were the first body of folks to see our plan, and we thought that was the right thing to do. It was probably a shock. Anytime you go in front of a historic preservation type group and ask for a demolition, you're probably not going to get a big hug. And we didn't get a big hug.
Right. What are some of the reasons, and I should be more familiar with this, that the Preservation Society is what are they holding on to in terms of why they're blocking this and opposing this? Is it the principle of it, or is there something more
concrete?
Yeah, concrete that they're holding on to.
I think their intentions are they're very good and they're very founded. And I think their goal, like a lot of us, is to, in any instance that makes it economical or viable, to try and save historical buildings. The unique aspect of this particular building is it's not a building, it's 8 buildings. And there's a variety of elevations, there's different roof design. It is a very complicated...
it used to be described as a rabbit hutch at one point.
I agree. So it's not so clean and simple as just saving the building. And we have gone through, as have dozens of people, looking at viable ways to save it. And to date, can't happen.
So does it impact that whole block of buildings in addition to the Mercantile, or how does it work?
No, the Mercantile is really on the southern half of that block that is bounded between Front and Main and Higgins and Patty.
I see.
Yeah.
So when you looked at putting this mixed-use project in this place, you obviously did a bigger feasibility study of the market. You realize that the mall, Southgate Mall, is going through a major renovation, adding a food alley, now there's announced a new Carmack Theater with the multi-level seating and the food services and all that sort of stuff. Is this the project that's going to be the anchor for if not revitalization, boosting downtown into a competitive environment?
I think it certainly has all of the elements to do that. In the downtown master plan, this location calls out for an anchor use, like Macy's.
Right.
And certainly a 154-room custom residence Inn by Marriott would, by anybody's estimation, be called an anchor. And so we think that downtown doesn't necessarily need to be revitalized, but I like what you said. It is going to be a tremendous boost. And communities a lot like Missoula, like Bozeman, like Helena, we do see growth in the outskirts.
Mm-hmm.
We see a tremendous amount of movement towards Reserve Street. If we don't pay attention to our downtown, it could die.
Right.
And that's a scary thought, because there's some amazing architecture, there's amazing businesses, and we don't want it to die. We want it to revitalize. We want it to be strong.
Well, it's one of the things, there's always that Missoula-Bozeman competition. But one of the strengths of Bozeman is that downtown main street is an attraction. People like to come down there and go, from going to Ted Turner's place. I mean, all the way down that whole strip. It's inviting, and there's a good mixed use of product there that makes you want to spend time, down there. And I think the same for Missoula. Missoula needs that same chemistry here. So besides 154 rooms, what else do you envision being in the site?
So I think you're right in Bozeman. Bozeman is smaller, and Bozeman has the benefit of basically a one-street main street. So it is very dense. We're changing that with some of our projects going north on Mendenhall and growing that. Missoula has a grid pattern already in it, and frankly, it's got two anchors. The university on one side, St. Patrick's on the other, our two largest employers. That's amazing. And so we have the opportunity to be kind of infill, but Missoula needs other things. It needs people living there. It needs employers down there, and we think what we're doing is a catalyst to that. In addition to the hotel component, we'll have about 24,000 square feet of ground floor retail. It's going to be anchored by town square media.
I love that idea. I told them.
I like the sales pitch. We're
But in addition to us, restaurants, right? And what else?
Restaurants.
Are you going to bring Dave's up from Bozeman?
So we would expect a great mix of other restaurants, retailers, bars, really pedestrian-friendly, active space that deserves to be on that corner.
Right. So are you looking at Missoula as more than just a one-site opportunity for your company? Are you looking at exploring other possibilities in Missoula?
We would love to be involved in other opportunities in Missoula. We love the fundamentals of this community. We have to look at things that are not as emotional and anecdotal. So we look at things that are very factual. We look at job growth. We look at net immigration, growth patterns. Missoula is amazing. It's got an incredible university here that's going through a little bit of a time, but that's going to heal itself, and they're going to come back stronger than ever. So we think the fundamentals of Missoula are phenomenal.
And as we look at the same issues, as a citizen, we look at the same things. We want that kind of mixed use vibrancy, because it all feeds into the same, purpose. More hotels, more retail leads to an environment that more employers who are thinking of relocating or building, expanded facilities here see more resources and more, infrastructure for their own employees. We're building, as you know, a 2-year tech school here, and that's going to add a lot of different job creation possibilities to the community. So hopefully you're contemplating that as you're looking at this community, and obviously as you have in Bozeman.
We hope to be here the long term. As I mentioned, we think there's a lot of needs, opportunities. One is we touched on is housing. We think more people should be and want to live in a downtown setting where they can walk to 100 restaurants and retailers and the Wilma on one side and
USB on the other.
I mean,
what is it?
Don't forget the Roxy. The hip strip is also, it's on the other side.
Right on the other side.
We had the hip strip, but you got that beautiful, what is it, the old train station over on the far end, on the north end?
Before your time, there was a restaurant. There was a fish house in that train station.
Is that right? Yeah. And then it was also the Iron Horse, wasn't it?
Yeah, the Iron Horse was there, and others were there.
Okay.
Now it's more, it has a commercial use as opposed to a
But this property could be the catalyst to a lot of growth in the downtown and then along the river. I have always wondered, Arnie, why the river is not a more actively kind of developed, even from a foot traffic kind of like like a Riverwalk type. Maybe not
Well,
that commercial, but
it ebbs and flows a lot, that river. I mean, there are times where the water's up to the windows at the
Right.
at Finn and Porter's, and then other times it's you can almost walk across it.
but there are parts of it that are developed, right along Caris, that whole park area.
Well, there is going to be, as Andy knows, there is a plan for the riverfront triangle, around where St. Pat's is for
Right.
another hotel, and a convention conference space,
Right.
and upscale medical retail and more apartments. And I agree, the vibrancy of a downtown core that has a gateway on the east and then has a university on the other side lends itself to attracting the kind of mix that small town America wants. I mean, Bozeman and Missoula are highly rated among small towns for retirement in America, small towns for entrepreneurship and for high tech growth. All of those things.
I was going to say, what type of tenant does a downtown residential attract? Like, what's the demographic look like?
Well, what we're seeing is, with the age of the internet and how people shop, that's affecting the retailers. A lot of retailers are going smaller. They're going more experiential. So like an Apple store, people go in and try the iPad. They try these things, and they go online and they order it.
Right.
One thing that you can't do online is eat and drink.
Right.
And so, clearly, people love to go out to eat, and so we think some of our retailers will be food, beverage centric, but we also think we'll have an opportunity to have more experiential type uses.
Right. Well, the more of those restaurants that you bring in, the less I have to go online to buy the food I want.
That's right. Stu Leonard's.
Yeah. So, what will the rooms look like? I mean, you talked about the type property that it's going to be, and we're familiar with that. But are there going to be the traditional kind of suites that Marriott uses in those properties?
No, so we everything from the design, the exterior, the interior is all going to be custom. So we have that opportunity. As I have talked before, one of the last decision to make is your art program. And
Right.
sometimes it can be an afterthought. And we've all been in hotel rooms and lobbies that have the worst art.
Right.
And we have a gift. And our proposal is with the Muse down below, running right into the lobby, into the rooms, can be really a tribute to the Mercantile itself. I mean, there's amazing photographs, imagery, artifacts that we would love to bring into the new Mercantile and really celebrate that. So from a design perspective, it'll be very custom. It'll feel and look like Missoula. But in terms of the rooms themselves, we did make a decision to go with an extended stay hotel, and that's important because it really complements both the Holiday Inn and the DoubleTree, who are more traditional rooms. And so we think that's a great complement. And we think, now that the Holiday Inn is renovating their hotel, we think that's fantastic.
Yeah. Isn't there a hotel that they were contemplating building up here by the mall, that development that was supposed to go in?
Yeah, there.
Is that still
It's hard to tell,
right?
but there is more hotel property even in the old Sawmill district, which we're playing an investment role in. There's a boutique inn type property that's contemplated for that as well. There isn't enough. I mean, as you know, most universities have their own inn of some sort and have executive housing for their, at Indiana University, other places, and we don't have that here. And so there's an opportunity, given the downtown and the riverfront triangle area being so close to the university, to provide more amenities that feed into the overall university community.
I agree.
Interesting.
So, the Chamber of Commerce, what's their position on all of this?
I did see and receive a letter from them. They came out in support of the project, which we were thrilled to receive. I think they recognize the challenges that this building has had over the course of 6-7 years, and the economic void is felt. It's a blight. and all of us would love to see that building renovated.
Right.
Okay? There isn't a person on our team or in this community who, if it was possible, would want to see it renovated. 6 years, 7 years is a long time for
Right.
people to try and attempt to find a tenant, find a user, repurpose it. And I think time has come, and I think the chamber recognizes that, and I think they're excited to see,
Sure.
a new investment.
We're on talking to Andy Holloran with HomeBase Montana here on What Do You Know? Quick question, though, based on that. Is it even possible, and I know you brought this up before, to find a tenant for a 60,000 square foot piece of property?
Well, the building itself is about 100,000 square feet.
It's 100,000?
Yes.
Okay.
And so in our experience, any lender, and there's some amazing banks in our community here, is going to want some pre-leasing requirement. Mm-hmm. And that ranges anywhere from 50 to 75%.
Mm-hmm.
So just to get the basic renovation financing, there needs to be a tenant or a group of tenants that are credit-worthy, financeable, that are at least 50, 60, 70,000 square feet. That's been the primary crux of the issue.
Well, wasn't there was some discussion, I don't know how real it was, that Whole Foods had an interest in that property. And obviously they took a pass on it. Was that true? And if that was true, what do you know about why they took a pass?
That is true. They looked at it twice. The most recent was last summer with a group out of Chicago, Clark Street Partners.
Sure.
And the renovation costs were too high. The rents that Whole Foods was willing to pay was not close to being adequate to just fund the basic debt.
Right.
And so it didn't work for a variety of reasons. But there's been a lot of people and a lot of tenants, the university and St. Patrick's and the library, have looked at it. And Octagon Partners, who's the current owner, they've been living this for 6 years. So they've got a long list of folks that have looked at it.
So is Octagon supportive of what you're doing?
Very much so.
I mean, they'd like to have something happen after all this time.
Well, they've been living with this for 6 or 7 years and paying the taxes, paying the insurance, paying the maintenance. And they're frustrated because they wanted to redevelop it. That's why they bought it. This is all they do. They renovate historic buildings throughout the United States.
It's one thing if this is a piece of property that's on the outskirts of town in a warehouse district. This is not. This is prime real estate. This is a little bit of an eyesore. I mean, it definitely is an eyesore in our downtown.
Well, I think some of the, if I would speak for the opposition, which I don't know if I can accurately characterize, a generic statement, their hope would be, or has been, that with some city support and maybe some subsidy of some sort, they could make the building economically viable to a commercial tenant. But it doesn't appear so far that any champion has come along to just dump money into the building to make it commercially viable. Would that be a fair assessment of maybe to keep the design element and to keep the the facade on the front, to keep the leaded glass and all that sort of stuff, that in order for that to be commercially viable after everybody's looked at it, there would have to be some subsidy, some significant subsidy to make that work.
You bet. And so the cost is one aspect of this. It's also the functionality of that building. It's basically a big square. So retailers and office users and homeowners, residents like natural light. And so a big part of this building it's very dark. So that's a challenge, just the configuration of the existing building. The facade itself it's in tough shape. It was sandblasted, the brick, in 1976. A lot of that masonry has deteriorated. The storefront was brought on at a later date. It's an aluminum storefront. And so retailers today want current space. They want high ceilings. They want flexibility. They want windows and doors that open up to the public and bring the people in.
Right.
And right, wrong, or indifferent, our opinion is That's very, very difficult to do with that existing building. But that doesn't mean we can't incorporate some of those design elements
Right.
and aspects into the new project, which we've been working on.
Right. So the yin and the yang of this is how much do you have to incorporate to come to a middle ground with the folks that want to see something that gives them some visceral feel that there is a link to the past.
Have you ever seen the movie Tin Men?
Yes.
So
Danny DeVito.
when he goes to buy the Cadillac.
Right.
How much would you like to pay? I'd like to pay nothing.
Right. Yeah.
So we're on these two opposite spectrums.
Right.
We would like to start from scratch, and there's some great people on the preservation side that would like it completely renovated. Our goal is to work together and find that middle ground, and we're hopeful that can happen.
Andy, so you're the chief representative for HomeBase. You're the founder. Who else is working with you on this project from your group or from other entities?
You bet. We have a great group of folks in our office in Bozeman that handle financing aspects, design, project management functions. We've also surrounded ourselves with a great group of investors who are excited about Missoula and share that passion that we do, not only in Bozeman but Montana as a whole. So we've got a great group of people.
Good. How big is your company? HomeBase.
We have 5 people.
Is it 5 people? Wow. Mostly outsourcing for other aspects of it.
We do. We hire local contractors and subcontractors. We bring on local design folks. So it really is a smaller group that is very focused, and we all have great strengths and such. So.
Well, Andy, this has been very instructive and informative.
Thank you.
And we look forward to seeing how this is going to all unfold over the next few weeks in this community. And it's not something that's atypical. I mean, many communities go through this kind of a situation of the development versus maintaining the status quo or maintaining a vision of the past while moving forward. I mean, it's a complicated issue. Lots of individuals and organizations have to face it, and you seem to have the right attitude for it, and we hope things for you work out the way you hope they will.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate your time.
Is there a website people can go to check out plans and more information?
Yeah, we have a website, HomeBaseMontana.com. And we'll be continuing to visit and present and meet with people on our evolution of design. So we're here to be a source of information and a source of feedback.
Great. We'll ask you to come back once all this, when the dust is settled, if that ever happens, and talk about the future. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Andy. Guest is Andy Holloran, founder of HomeBase Montana and the principal in the Mercantile Project, and doing everything good there. So, Arnie, any parting thoughts here?
So I'd like to do a recapitulation of kind of where we are in real time on all of this, Scott. First of all, HomeBase is not evil. There's been a couple of hearings in the last few days in terms of the Historic Preservation Society. And the first one, they didn't have 4 people showed up and they didn't ask any questions. The one that happened Thursday night, they had 8 members showed up, and they took a vote essentially to postpone and said they need more time to consider what's going on. It's a concern about change. This is all about change. I mean, as we've talked about in the last 30 minutes with Andy, just because a building is old doesn't mean it's historic. Right. And people do have fond memories even of their outhouse when they grew up on the farm, right?
Yep.
And I'm not saying it's an outhouse, but it is a hodgepodge building. 20 different groups have taken a look at it and taken a pass.
Right.
I mean, that says something. When Clark Street Real Estate gave Whole Foods a design for using the place, and they took a look at it. It would cost them $20 million. I mean, Whole Food knows what they're doing. They're not just a one-off kind of operation. It cost them $20 million to do a complete renovation, and they would have lost $6 million on the deal. Now, the response from some, concerned community members who want to maintain it would be, well, can't we get, new market tax credits or some other government subsidy? And, from time to time, new market tax credits are available. They aren't currently available for the project because they've used them all, but they could be. But this has been going on for 6 years, and no one has stepped up to the plate that's willing to take that property on and do something with it, except HomeBase is ready to move forward. Other people have stepped up. It's been bought and sold. In fact, the current owners bought it with the intention of rehabilitating it. We know that. And they concluded it couldn't be done feasibly. And that was a group, J.P. Williamson, he had done 11 historic renovations and financed 17 other similar projects.
And he passed?
Well, he said it couldn't be done.
It couldn't be done.
You can't make the whole facility usable for one tenant.
Right.
Unless you spend $20 million. And all of the other ideas are, not bad ideas if someone is willing to write a check. But up until now, no one has been able to. And, there's going to be at some point in time, by June 7th, the Historic Preservation Commission has to vote. And if they vote it down, the developer, Andy HomeBase, can go to the city council directly and appeal.
Right.
And, my sense is, given that, the Downtown Business Improvement District has supported the plan for demolition, given that the Chamber of Commerce voted 85%, and I know, what people on the other side will say, well, they're the devil. They just want business in town. Well, that's what downtown's for business.
Right.
I would love to see it. Everybody would love to see the old building be able to be used in its entirety. But it just doesn't seem, after 6 years and 20 different groups and everybody looking at it, and I understand now that the inevitability that they're going to demolish it, everybody's trying to figure out, is there some white knight out there that's going to come in and keep it and use it? I mean, an empty building at the corner of downtown that doesn't create any energy for downtown is
or jobs
is worse than having nothing.
Tax revenue.
So it's a tough situation. What I do have to say, is that HomeBase has modified their plans. As Andy mentioned, they want to use whatever they can use. They're going to use some of the leaded glass. They're going to use some of the copper tin ceilings. They're going to use pictures. They're going to preserve. They've changed their design from something more sleek and contemporary
to accommodate,
to more traditional looking, entranceway and courtyard. And from everyone that's looked at the new architectural plans, they seem to think it was a good movement in the right direction. And it may still move a little bit more. So here's a developer that's willing to come in, accommodate, some of the community concerns. Just doesn't look like you can save the full building and provide any use for it. People have said maybe the library could move there, but the library doesn't want to spend $20 million renovating it and then it just doesn't,
There's
fit.
Only so much to go around.
There's just so much to go around. And it would be nice to save it, but historic preservation really focuses on buildings that can be saved in a reasonable way, and there is community support for different use. I mean, there are a lot of foundations in this community. There's a lot of high net worth individuals. A lot of folks have looked at this. They've heard about the demolition, but no one's willing to write a check. There's just a lot of ideas about what could be done by people who aren't prepared to do it. They're just hoping somebody else will take their idea and it'll pencil out, but it doesn't seem to be the case.
Hope is not a strategy.
No. Yeah, right. Wishing and hoping without a plan doesn't produce much of anything.
No.
So, I mean, some of the listeners who are, and some of my friends who are opposed to the demolition are going to say you're just siding with, big business and the developers. No. My personal position is I'd like to see as much of it as saved as feasible, but I'd like to see, after 6 years of it being vacant and having bums and homeless people sitting out in front of it,
right,
and being an eyesore on the entrance to the downtown,
right,
we have somebody who is willing to make a $30 million investment in downtown Missoula, and let's let him do it.
And I think it's also important to mention that you have other businesses in town that have invested in preserving and building out, like the Wilma or the Top Hat. And for them, for someone to make improvements downtown only enhances the money that they've sunk into to downtown. So
it's
you're
I wish
punishing them by not approving this.
Right. Well, if this was if they wanted to tear down the depot at the other end of downtown, the train depot,
right,
that would be a big deal, because that building, is a much more solid, usable, building, and there've been tenants moving, and it is in use. But this thing has been empty for 6 years, and no one else has come forward, and people have taken a good look at it, and the right tenants have looked at it. It's a perfect location for a Whole Food or a Trader Joe's, but folks have looked at it who were in that industry and have walked away.
Need parking.
So,
quick question.
Sure.
Since I'm new to town, relatively new to town. What was where First Interstate was before that building was erected?
There was there were older space, but it was not historically significant.
It wasn't, but. You see what happens when you actually build out a corner and you create some value there. Every businesses open up around it. Now you have other businesses.
There's a little more nostalgia, obviously, for the Missoula Mercantile, and we all get it, and it'll be great. And but it's just it was pieced together, as we know from earlier on in our conversation with Andy. It was 8 different buildings. They're on different levels. The floors aren't even.
Right.
There's asbestos issues. It's there's no parking. And they've come up with a plan. They've modified the plan. They may modify it even further to give it a more of a downtown look, as I said. And as we know, they're going to preserve some of the fixtures that had the Merca feel, but. You can't unless a white knight steps forward is willing to spend to lose $6 million on that building, essentially.
Right.
The right use for it is something like Andy's proposing. They'll bring hundreds of people every night, new people to downtown that will be. That will use the restaurants, that will be shopping in the other stores downtown, that will be enjoying the Missoula community.
Yeah, foot traffic patron. I'm curious. There are other places around the country that are a good example of how they were able to preserve a historic building, but also build it out and create more space and more usable space. If I'm not mistaken, I think. Union Station in Washington, D.C.
Well, most of the train stations in Kansas City and others have been restored. But those were big, substantial, brick and mortar facilities that you can, the Musée d'Orsay in Paris was a train station, and they made it into a museum. One of the recommendations is maybe the library could move in there, but apparently the library doesn't feel that space meets, can meet their needs. And Europe does a lot of it, but Europe puts a lot of public money. I mean, these buildings are not all privately developed.
Is that right?
Yeah. I mean, there's a huge amount of public infrastructure and public money that goes into it. And, other merchants and other businesses might object to the fact, if somebody came in here and used $20 million of public money to save a building that still wouldn't have a tenant.
Right. This guy's bringing in a tenant and several tenants.
Right. He's going to
Andy, is it worth encouraging our listeners to look at Andy's website, HomeBase.com?
Well, I think it is.
Some of the other projects he's done.
Yeah, I think he has a commitment to a small town, to small town living. He lives in Bozeman. He's probably going to move to Missoula if this project, comes to life.
Right.
And as you know, the city historic preservation officer and the staff recommended the approval of the demolition permit, and they took a look as unbiasedly as they could. Now, someone also could say, I'm trying to be both sides of this. The mayor, supported it from the beginning, and all the people in the city work for the mayor. But I think he supported it for the reason that if you take the emotion out of it.
Right.
He's got a building that's been empty for 6 years, and somebody comes along and wants to put, a Marriott downtown and bring that and make a $30 million investment in a city. You got it, and that's been the only one that's willing to go this far.
Well, his website address is HomeBaseMontana.com. HomeBaseMontana.com, and he has a bunch of projects on there that he's done over the last couple of years in and around Bozeman.
Right.
That maybe would be worth.
And it's a
looking at.
Montana company doing something in Montana. It's not like, somebody coming in that isn't sensitive to, to living in this state.
Yep, I think that's right. Look at the Block M project that he did. That's where they put the new Element Hotel.
Sure. I mean, Bozeman's happy with what's going on. And I don't want to compare Missoula to Bozeman. I mean, they didn't tear down necessarily a building that has, 140 years of nostalgia associated with it.
Right.
But, in some ways, you can make the argument if people love the building so much, they would have, they would have patronized Macy's more when it was there. I mean, Macy's was the perfect tenant for it, and they had to leave. The most people I ever saw in Macy's was when Macy's had their closing sale, to move out of town. That was the most people that showed up at Macy's.
I'll tell you what, I would look at his project on HomeBaseMontana.com. Look at Experience 5 West. That's the downtown Bozeman project, and it's just worth taking a look at. There's a video.
And here's a developer that wants to do more projects in and around Missoula. Wants to do more investment. It's not so easy to get people to invest in in the community to do projects that benefit the economic vibrancy of our town. And so we should be a little open-minded to the fact that if he could, I mean, he didn't decide initially, let's tear down the building and then build a case for why we want to do it. They originally came in like everybody else to see if they could save it.
Right.
And when they saw the numbers,
it didn't work.
Right.
The thing that people also need to remember is that when you put something new in town like this, that the infrastructure in and around the downtown area improves. They're going to need to improve things.
Sure.
Electricity, connectivity.
So the Historic Preservation Commission has to make a determination by June 7th. They're fragmented on this, and people have recused themselves, and only 4 people voted at the last meeting. And
how many do they need for a vote?
Well, I think there
14.
Well, there's only I think 10 members that haven't recused themselves, and some of the others should have. I think they have to have at least 5 or 6 members that support it, and I'm not sure they're going to get that. I think their strategy is to let the city be the fall guy on this, the city council. And my personal guess, the city council will approve it, and we'll move forward after this.
And we'll have to have a follow-up after this.
Sure.
Let's see what happens.
Sure.
All right.
Hey, we'll see you next week, Scott. We have a good show next week coming up. We have former Grizz defensive lineman Austin Mullins, who followed his dream to Nashville and is an agent for William Morris Endeavor IMG, talking about working in the country music industry. So that'll be a fun show.
We'll have a lot to talk to him about. All right, we'll see you next week on What Do You Know? Thank you for listening to What Do You Know?
I can't wait for the next show, Scott.
I'm excited too, Arnie. If you'd like to suggest a guest, send me an email at scottrichmond@townsquaremedia.com. We'll see you next week. And thanks for listening to Newstalk KGVO, AM 1290, 1015 FM, and newstalkkgvo.com.